Hi everyone, it's Ian here from IBF Performance Coaching, and today we're going to be talking about stress. We're going to be talking about how you can become more resilient to stress and how you can turn it to your benefit when possible. So, enjoy the video, and I'll see you on the other side. Stress is an ever-present, very ubiquitous topic in modern day life. You hear about it all the time. You hear about stress relief, stress management techniques. People talk about mindfulness. They talk about exercise, and all of these things are very important. But I'm going to bring, hopefully, what is a new, useful, valuable perspective to stress today, and I'm going to give you some things that will reframe your understanding of stress and how you can approach it in the most constructive way possible. So let's start by recognizing that stress is not one monolithic thing. There's a whole, spectrum of stress that you can go through. You can be under stressed, in which case you're going to perform suboptimally because you're not activated enough. You're not engaged enough. So, if you're laying on the sofa and you have no stimulus to do anything, right? There's nothing coming in. There's no input coming in. There's no challenge. Your performance is also not going to be all that great. Your thinking isn't going to be that clear. Now, this is not the stress that people typically talk about. What we typically talk about is when we are overstressed, when we're overloaded, when we are exceeding our cognitive load or our bandwidth, to use a common term these days. This is where we have too much going on. There's too much stimulus. The challenge is too great. It's too complex. And we feel like we're drowning. And it's very hard to get a sense of making progress or to even know where to begin in some cases. It feels like you're swimming upstream. And in this case, your performance will also be suboptimal because you are overwhelmed. You're overwhelmed. It's like, if you're playing a sport against somebody who is just so much better than you that you don't even stand a chance, you're not going to perform as well. And if you're playing against somebody who's a lot worse than you, they talk about playing down to your competition. Okay, likewise, that would be underactivated, understimulated, understressed. This suggests, though, that there is a place in the middle. This is what we would call the optimal stress zone, or even eustress, which is a concept we'll come back to in a minute here. This is the place where your performance is optimized. And it's a place where you're dealing with enough complexity that it's engaging, that it requires your full attention, but not too much that is overwhelming. There's enough time pressure. There's enough motivation, because that can also increase stress. If you are super highly motivated, super highly committed to achieving some outcome, that can be a source of stress that can actually reduce your performance if you're not careful. So this zone that we're talking about here, this optimal stress zone, this is like playing against somebody who is at a similar level, slightly better than your level perhaps, and you're playing up to the competition. You are on your game. You're really focused. This is also where things like flow states happen. A flow state is really not all that much more than your bandwidth being essentially taken completely up, which is why things like time will seem to pass much faster. You'll be in the zone because you are unable to think of anything outside of what it is that you're focused on, right? You're in that activity completely, and as a result, you get this flow state, you get this optimal performance where you're just dialed in. Okay, and so this is something called the Yerkes-Dodson law, and there's a curve that goes along with it. And it's a good thing to keep in mind. Not all stress is bad. Too little stress can be bad. Too much stress can be bad. But optimal stress is really what we're looking to achieve. Now, I mentioned the term eustress. This is also important to know. We have distress. This would be where you're in too much stress or perhaps too little, right? If you're not getting enough exercise, your body can go into distress because it's not being stressed enough. Part of our neurology demands that we have a certain degree of stress. This is one reason why you might find that if you spend too much time with somebody, you end up starting fights with them, right? You certainly will notice you have kids. Things can go super well for a while, and then one of them will just seem like they want to start a fight. They want a little bit more chaos. They want a little bit more stress in the relationship. And that's similar to the relationship we have with our bodies. What we are trying to achieve here is not, a state of like overtraining or overexercise, a state of distress, but a state of eustress, where it's EU stress, right? Eu meaning good, just like in eudaimonia is the good life. So eustress is the right amount of stress to sort of optimize your performance, but also your development over time. The right amount of exercise, the right intensity of exercise, the right consistency, the right frequency, all those sorts of things. Okay, so just knowing that these categories exist can be very helpful. Now, let's talk about some of the lesser known strategies for dealing with stress. And to illustrate these, I'm going to be drawing on some studies. Okay, the first one is a pretty famous study of Wall Street traders and the effects of stress. Now, being a Wall Street trader, this is a super high stress job, and so the researchers looked at how stress affected people in this job. They identified where the stress was coming from. And one of the interesting findings of this research was that though they had the same levels of stress coming from things like, pressure to achieve certain gains in their portfolios, or time pressures, or all sorts of other expectations like that, other sorts of stress, the risk of losing a whole lot, that's a high source of stress. The high achievers, the more successful traders, were more resilient to stress. And this was not, they were successful because they were more resilient to stress. It actually ran in the opposite direction. Success caused a buffer. It caused them to be more resilient to stress. It allowed them to process the stress more efficiently, effectively, and to sort of, be able to manage it, to overcome it, to be resilient against it. So what is the takeaway? Success is like body armor for stress. If you're feeling successful, you will be able to deal with stress more. This was similar, no, it's not exactly financial success. There was another study done with politicians in the UK, and similarly, they found here that the people experienced similar levels of stress regardless of whether they were higher or lower on the hierarchical ladder. But the people at the higher levels seemed to be buffered by their status. The feelings of being successful, the feelings of being higher up the ladder, were themselves protecting against the effects of stress. Now, you may not be able to do anything, right away to make yourself feel like you're of higher status, though it is possible that you could, right? I'm not going to completely throw out that possibility. If you have diplomas that you aren't hanging on your walls, or other signs of achievement that you associate with successes that you've had, it really could be this might be why people hang up the first dollar that their business made. One perhaps reason for that is to remind them of successes that they've had. And so that potentially raises their status, raises their feeling of success. Okay, so this could be one way to make yourself more resilient to stress. But another way is, when you are feeling stress, is to look for small wins and jump right into those. And so people will just say, take action. That's the solution. But it really depends what you're taking action on. Because if you're taking action means for you, tackling some huge complex problem that you're probably not going to make much headway on, then it might not be a great idea. It's much better in many of these situations to engage with something that's small, or something that you can succeed at. Do the laundry, wash the dishes, fold your clothes, clean up your room, this sort of thing, when you're feeling highly stressed, right? And that can help you to become more resilient, feel successful, get the small wins, and then you can move on to the bigger stuff. Now, I do know that this is also potentially a trap for people, where, they will do the dishes instead of doing the hard work. And that is not exactly what I'm suggesting. I'm not suggesting, take yourself away from the difficult work and allow yourself to do something easier and only ever score the small wins, right? You want to avoiding the hard work to do the easy work, of course. Use the easy work to get you into the hard work. So if you're dreading starting something, do something easy first and allow it to ease you into doing the more difficult thing by building up that resilience to stress and scoring those small wins. Okay, one other study to talk about here, and this one is a study of soldiers. Okay, now they were looking at the apparent conundrum or puzzle of the fact that typical enlisted soldiers seem to deal with things like PTSD and much higher ulcers and sort of the physical and psychological manifestations of stress at much higher rates than special operations troops did. And they wondered why this was, because actually special operations troops, right, engage in more combat, more dangerous situations. They're sent into the harder places to do the harder things. So you would imagine that they would experience more stress, and they very well might experience more stress. But the findings of this study, the takeaway, the sort of interpretation of what they found, was that the special operations troops were more resilient to stress. There might have been a characterological thing, but accounting for that, they were buffered against stress by the amount of control they had. Right? Special operations troops tend to be the ones who plan their missions. They get to choose when to engage, or they get the orders that they have to engage, but they're the ones that start the engagement, right? So they pull the trigger often first, or they're the ones who are laying the ambushes, whereas typical enlisted men are, driving down the road in their Humvee, worrying about whether or not they're going to be ambushed. Now, they're both at the end of the day going to end up in a firefight, but it's really about who feels like they're in the position of control. And so this gives us that concept of locus of control. An external locus of control is going to make you much more vulnerable to stress. If you believe that the things that happen to you and you don't have much agency in determining what happens, you're going to struggle with stress a lot more. Whereas if you can move that locus of control internally and feel like you're the one making decisions, you're essentially the one in the driver's seat, then you're going to have a much more resilient stance, psychological stance when it comes to stress. So this is really nothing more than awareness and habit, right? It's building an awareness of whether or not you are in the driver's seat currently, building that, that habit of checking whether you're in the driver's seat, building the awareness of what it feels like to be in the driver's seat versus not, and then implementing some sort of basic strategy to reset yourself in the driver's seat. I've talked about things like dropping anchor, where you, accept your current emotional state, psychological state, you connect with your body, and you expand your awareness into the environment a little bit. This is a very easy practice to begin developing, but one that can be profoundly effective and really form a foundation of a sense of control in your life, where your thoughts are producing a higher quality existence rather than detracting from the quality of your existence and causing you more distress. Your thoughts are what translate stress into either distress or eustress. So take control of those and you've got the reins, and it's all up to you at that point. Okay, and that's where I will sign off. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope that this was helpful. Please check out the Facebook page below if you want to, get in touch or learn more. You can always book a coaching session with me for free at the link below. I got all sorts of programs that you can check out on Udemy, typically on sale for very cheap. And I appreciate everybody who watches the channel and everybody who supports in the ways that you know how. Okay, so I just want to remind everybody here that excellence is a choice. Elite performance is always up to you. So go after it. Go get it. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks.